So Brian, welcome to the show. I guess we get an official start now.
Yes, thanks for having me.
We were just going great. We were just talking about all our backstories and working at IDG and TechTarget.
It's a small world.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's one of the things I love about this world is that, I mean, there's people I've worked with over the years, and we've parted ways for one reason or another, and then all of a sudden 10 years go by and we're working together again.
Sure.
You know, and it sounds like we even know some of the same people.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly, I've been in the vendor side of the house. Any of the agencies or consulting firms, you always end up working with them.
Yeah.
And it becomes a relationship that carries through years and years and years. So it is a small world, but it's been a blast to work in, no question.
Yeah. So you have a long career in marketing. I want to dive into that. Did you start in marketing, or, you know, how did you get to what you were doing? I mean, I know you were acting CMO and running global marketing teams.
Yeah.
How'd you get to that point?
Yeah. So I was at Nortel for a while, doing a bunch of different roles, working with alliances and business development, and I started working, believe it or not, with an internet service provider.
Okay.
So this is back in 2000 or so, and I went over there and started. They were a small ISP on a national basis. I ran marketing for them. We ended up going public. Didn't last long for a number of reasons, but then I was recruited into a startup that was working with pediatricians. And for 2.5 years, I was in sales.
Okay.
So you would ask me earlier about ever being in sales.
Yeah.
So I always knew marketing was where I wanted to go, but I figured I should know what it's like to be a salesperson. So for 2.5 years, I actually did that.
How'd you like it?
It's hard. It's extremely hard. I worked a lot with consumer companies like Johnson & Johnson and Gerber, and we were selling into them. Cold calling was a big part of it because I was at a small company. Nobody knew who we were. So I learned the hard way that it's very, very difficult. Which allowed me to, when I get into these roles, I have a appreciation for sales. I know what it means when they say, hey, we need the following from marketing, because I was the same way for the 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I actually love working around salespeople.
Yeah.
I'm not a salesperson, although every role you're in, you need to sell. But I really love being around salespeople, the energy and the excitement, and I love helping them drive pipeline and revenue. So
I think it gives you an edge for sure. So my late father, his advice to me when I was in business school was, you go into, because I wanted to go into marketing. He said, go into sales first, because if you know that world, you understand it, you're going to be a better marketer. And I don't think you have to do sales to be able to relate or understand it, but it definitely helps.
Yeah, I think I would offer the same advice and have.
Yeah.
Mentoring people is something I love to do, and I always say the same thing to them. You have to get into sales. I think, to your point, you don't have to necessarily to be successful, but until you know what they're up against and they're in front of customers or partners, and if the messaging isn't crisp, if they don't feel like they have the tools and the training, which is a big part of what marketing needs to do, then they're not equipped, and their job becomes very difficult. And also, you're in those you're in meetings with salespeople, and they're, quote, complaining that they don't have the following, etc. I always sit back and think, again, I've been in their shoes. I know what they're asking for, and they have every right to.
Yeah.
If you haven't been in sales, marketing people, I think, can get a little defensive if they don't really understand how hard that role is.
Yeah, makes sense. So how'd you switch over to marketing from there?
Yeah, so I ended up at a small company that was $75 million, and I started doing marketing again there, and I was able to get promoted through and ended up running global marketing. But I also was asked to start an inside sales team, which was a huge learning experience. And again, one that working with SDRs or whatever whatever the company calls them, understanding what that's like to try and hire the right people, train these people, put in place metrics, et cetera, was another big plus.
Yeah.
From there, we were bought by CA Technologies.
Can I ask you a question real quick? I think it's kind of a debate, or at least you can go either way in terms of inside sales rolling up to a sales organization or a marketing organization. Any opinion on that? Success in terms of SDRs if they're rolling up to a marketing head or a sales head?
I always believe it should report into sales. And the reason for that is they're salespeople.
Yeah.
And you want them within that environment, and the leadership of the region, the sales leadership, also feels responsibility for that SDR team. Now, the argument on the other side could be, yeah, but they can kind of point to marketing and the leads. And my philosophy is I always assign somebody from marketing to be dedicated to the SDR team.
Okay.
Why? Because our job is to work together.
Yeah.
I always look for joint KPIs, and the inside sales team needs marketing support. And so having somebody tied to the hip to make sure we're giving them what they need. The other thing I always do is have weekly or bi-weekly meetings where together with the inside sales leadership, we go through the metrics. Okay, tell us why these leads weren't good. Tell us why these leads were good. How are we doing on conversion rates? How can we help you, et cetera? So my firm belief is it belongs in sales, but you need to put in place these other things to make sure there isn't finger pointing.
Can't just punt it over there. There's got to be clear lines of communication, collaboration, expectations.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And clear agreement on joint KPIs. So what are we agreeing to in terms of how much pipeline leads are going to generate versus cold calling versus partners and sales? And what are we going to agree is a, quote, hot lead, what's the score, et cetera. Have all that worked out, not go to them with, all right, here's how we're going to define, et cetera. So it takes a lot of pre-work.
Yeah.
But again, because I really enjoy working with salespeople, I find that very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Like, let's all agree on what it is and then track it. And
well, everything comes down to expectations, right? Are we
right.
agreeing on those expectations as we move forward?
That's right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's fascinating for me. And then you ended up at CA Technologies?
CA Technologies, and I was hired in to run global campaigns.
Okay.
Then I ended up running America's marketing, and ultimately went into another role I wanted to make sure I had under my belt was product marketing. So I ended up running a business unit for about a year and a half, which was, again, eye-opening from the standpoint of messaging, positioning, working with Gartner on the Magic Quadrant and all of that, what that includes.
Were you learning product marketing as the leader of a product marketing group?
I was.
Okay.
I was.
So, all right, let's dive into that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating. Because, I talk to a lot of people that are eyeing in a job and they're thinking, I'm not qualified to do that job, or I don't have the experience to do that job. So what's your advice, or what did you learn, doing a job that you didn't necessarily have the domain expertise to do?
Yeah, so I learned very early on, and again, I tell people this who ask that same question. Hey, Brian, I'm considering this promotion, but the people on the team know more about the role, and I always say the same thing. Go in with an open mind, acknowledge you don't know it, and work with the people on your team to help you get up to speed.
Yeah.
And so that's the mindset that I went into it with. I always knew what product marketing did, and because I worked at a couple startups, I did content creation and I did messaging, not at the scale that I was doing it at CA.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time with the product marketers. I spent a lot of time with product management to understand the technology. So yes, it is absolutely and was a learning curve. But we were able to sit down with Gartner and get into the leader position with business assurance, et cetera. That was a team effort, but I was leading that team. And so my advice to anybody would be, particularly if you're trying to fill a particular function that you don't have, like your dad telling you to start in sales and then go to marketing, you just have to have the confidence to take the leap, but don't go in with the idea that you're going to go in and lead a team when they know more than you do.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny because I run a sales team here at Foundry IDG, and I've never been in the position where I feel like I have to be a better seller than my sales reps. And frankly, it's almost the opposite position. I'd rather hire sellers that are better than me at selling, because as a leader of the team, it's not my job to go out and sell. I mean, to a certain extent it is, but I'm not trying to do their jobs for them, and that's not my job. My job is to remove hurdles and figure out what tools they need. And, I have different responsibilities as a sales leader than as an individual contributor. And I see that mistake all the time with sales managers is they try to jump in and outsell their sales reps on calls. And it's like, well, first of all, they're not learning, and you're just doing the job for them.
Well, you have a confidence trait that a lot of leaders don't when you said you hire salespeople who are better salespeople than you are or know more than you are. That's exactly the right thing to do because we all need to learn, but I think sometimes people's confidence or ego get in the way of them doing that, and that's to their detriment as a leader. It's not easy to do, but again, maybe that product marketing role taught me something, which is it's okay for the people to know more, and I learned more from them than they did from me out of the gates.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so where did you go after product marketing?
Yeah, so then I was recruited into NetApp, and it's interesting. I was, vice president at CA Technologies. They called me to take over the Americas marketing team, which only had 18 people in it. Now, it was a $2.5 billion business, right, at NetApp. But it only had 18 people, and they wanted me to come in and really build that organization up and modernize it, et cetera. And it was a senior director role. And I bring this up because another life lesson I learned was it doesn't matter what your title is, it matters the impact you can have. So I was willing to say, hey, I'm a VP at CA, why would I take a senior director role? A, because I loved who my manager was going to be, who was the head of sales and the CMO. But I also saw an opportunity to really build on things. So went in there, built up the team to about 40 folks, modernized it, put in place a demand, all the things that you did back then. And was in that role for, I don't know, four and a half years reporting to the CMO. And then one Friday afternoon, we received a call from the president of the company that the CMO was leaving abruptly. I happened to be going to Sunnyvale that weekend because I was planning on being there for the next 3 days. And so I remember Monday walking through the parking lot, and the president of NetApp saw me and said, hey, Brian, you have a minute? I said, yeah, sure. And I said, sorry to hear about the CMO. He said, yeah. He said, 3 of your peers called me over the weekend and recommended you be the acting CMO. Would you do it? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. And so I took it with the understanding, hey, it'll be 60 days, 90 days, they'll find the person. They were looking for someone who had branded a company before, which obviously I hadn't. I was in the role for almost a year. And incredible experience, learned a ton. Was on George Currier's staff, on the executive staff, and right place at the right time, I guess. And then they ended up bringing in somebody from IBM who had branded IBM, and I went into a global role from that point. And then somebody called me and recruited me into Veeam.
Real quick, though,
Sure.
I want to hear about your time at Veeam, but would you, I guess I could ask, did you approach being an acting CMO differently than if you were the actual CMO?
Great question. So one of the founders of NetApp was a guy by the name of Dave Hitz. And he was still at the company. NetApp at the time was 25 years old. And he was in he was on the executive staff, but he was in kind of a floating role. And George Currier said to Dave, hey, Dave, do me a favor, just get with Brian and make sure that, you're guiding him the right way at this point. And I remember the first meeting, and Dave Hitz was an engineer, and he said, so Brian, I don't know much about marketing, so explain to me, what would you do, or what are you going to do? And I got up at the board and I said, all right, well, if I was the CMO, I would, and he said, nope, you are the CMO. And I said, what do you mean? From this day forward, you are the CMO, act like it. I said, okay, I will. And so I just took on, I'm gonna own this role until they bring in somebody else, and I did that.
So that's the key then, you gotta act as if it is your job.
It is my job.
Yeah.
So
not even act, it is your job.
It's my job, and so do the job to the best of your ability. And luckily I had a really good staff of people.
Yeah.
At that point I was running America's marketing, and I had a really good bench, and so they were able to kind of take it from there. But yeah, it was, I remember we were in probably 5 different markets right at the time, but Flash was really starting to take off. And I was with the head of worldwide sales, and he said to me, God, we have to win in this Flash market. Right now we're about number 5 in the IDC and et cetera. And so I thought about it over the weekend, and that Monday I said to the CEO, George, hey, would you be okay if we went all in on Flash on the Flash campaign? Like, we're in 5 different campaigns. We've got our budget split across, but just for the next 6 to 9 months. He asked the executive team. They said, all right, let's go for it. So that's what we did. We just put all of our chips on the table, and at the end of the year, IDC had us move from number 5 to number 2 in the Flash market. So
Wow.
It was marketing, it was sales, it was the team. But I always, if I think back on my career, every time that I made a jump, it was because I took a calculated risk.
Well, I think you said it best. Like, I mean, here you are as acting CMO, right? And I think a lot of people would consider themselves, if they're in an acting or interim position, you can't take those risks. And you even said it yourself. You pushed all the chips to the center of the table. You took a risk. And I think that's just really good advice for people, to not let that title or role that you might have, even if it's temporary, hold you back from what the right thing to do is.
Yeah, 100%. And if it wasn't for Dave Hitz, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Right? You need somebody, and again, I keep coming back to it. That's why I love mentoring people, because like you, I've made mistakes, right?
Yeah.
We all have. I've learned from them, and I've also consciously or unconsciously did some right things.
Yeah.
And passing that down to people, and it's giving. What did Dave Hitz give me? Confidence, right? And that's what you talked to you about. You're leading a sales team, right? A big part of your job is giving your team confidence that, hey, we're going to hit the number. You are going to close that deal, right? That's what you're giving. And I think as leaders, that's a big part of what we need to do, is give people confidence.
Yeah, and I love too that your network helped get you into that position. You said 3 of your peers had recommended you. And I don't mean network in the sense that, like, people talk about network today, and it's your connections on LinkedIn and people you reach out to that you may or may not know, but like people that genuinely wanted to see you succeed and take that position, like a real network of peers that helped you get to that.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
Yeah.
It just really came out of the blue, and I owe those people a lot, because Rob Salmon wouldn't have put me in that position if those people hadn't gone to bat for me.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. It was a great experience.
And I want to ask you about Veeam too, but this is why I love just hearing about people's career trajectories, because this is where all the learnings, I think, for me as a host and trying to learn from my guests, like, and other people listening, like, we can learn from other people's, mistakes and challenges and triumphs. And that's why I love just starting at the beginning. Like, how did you get to this point, and what was that journey like? Yeah,
there's another, actually, if I can go back, there's a learning moment I had when I was at that small company that was purchased by CA. I'll never forget, there were only 350 people in the company, and they brought us all together, and CA said, hey, if you're in sales or engineering, congratulations, you have a job. If you're in any of the other functions, you have 90 days to find a role in CA. And we were up here in Boston, and CA was on Long Island. And I thought, oh God, I have to start going down there, and I got to find somebody I can pitch to, et cetera. So I was taking this flight out of Logan Airport on a small plane that would go to Islandia. Long story short, one of the first times I was just waiting to get on the plane, I bumped into some guy, and I didn't know who he was, but we were just shooting the breeze. And then again, I kept seeing him, so I said, well, how come you're always going down there? He said, oh, I work at CA. I said, oh my God, I'm trying to get into CA, He ended up going to the CMO, unbeknownst to me, and saying, hey, I know this guy, Brian, I've been talking to him. I think you should call him. He might be right for this campaign role that I told you I started.
Yeah.
And the CMO called me.
Wow.
And so I always, when people ask me about this stuff, I always say, you never, ever know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So make sure, you're buttoned up, and you're just, I wasn't trying to sell. I didn't know if he was just going down there for vacation, but
that's great.
It worked out.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like you said at the beginning, it's a small world.
It is.
It really is.
It is very small.
Yeah.
No
So, all
problem.
right. So then you went to Veeam.
I went to Veeam,
Yeah.
and it was at the time a $600 million company, and the new CEO, I didn't know him, hired me in. Veeam was awesome. It was running like a $50 million company.
Wow.
But it was, meaning it was very entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
and the two founders were still deeply involved in it, and they loved marketing, so marketing was a great place to be. But with the rapid growth, there were a lot of processes and infrastructure that wasn't in place. So that was one of the reasons that the CEO hired me in. So I did all kinds of things at the beginning. I set up the first campaign framework. I set up the first global digital programs. I set up the first alliance marketing framework. So there were a lot of firsts that I was which I loved because I was doing
First for
okay.
you, or just first for the company, or both?
First for the company.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I had done, at some part in my career, I had done all of these things. So I was brought in to do this. So I loved it. I was being placed by the CEO in different spots, left
Yeah.
and right. And then one thing led to another, and then I was running America's marketing. And then I was quickly promoted to SVP of Global Field Marketing because the leader in EMEA unfortunately had to leave, and you can't backfill for about 9 months. Long story short, I spent a better part of 6 months over in EMEA, meeting with all the sales teams, the marketing teams, modernizing the organization, getting them more focused on the enterprise, which resulted in a 40% increase, et cetera, and then ended up being head of America's Marketing plus Global Partner Marketing. So
Okay.
I had a span of work
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So I want to dig in on the global versus a U.S. focused role. 'Cause
Sure.
I guess my question for you is opportunities, challenges when you're in a global position, and how you might approach that differently than if you're just U.S. focused.
Yeah, I think whether it's messaging, positioning, whether you're rebranding the company, whether you're doing demand generation, when you go from an America's role or a U.S. role to global, the nuances within the individual countries in EMEA and APJ around culture, around how they do business, how they work with partners, with messaging and branding, et cetera. You need to make sure that you're not U.S.-centric in that it applies and it's relevant in those other parts of the world. And it's very important to try and set up a consistent marketing structure across all three. So I always looked at it like 80 to 85% of the structure can be consistent in all three regions, but you have to prepare for nuances and culture differences, et cetera, within each one of those countries.
So how do you develop a consistent structure, but also being locally relevant? Like how do you allow for that nuance? Right?
Yeah, so I think the basics, like in a field marketing organization or a growth marketing organization, it can be pretty consistent in the structure of you need to align to sales, right? Marketing's org needs to align very well to sales, so every sales leader has one person to go to. Each region should have a demand center. So structurally, they're all pretty consistent from that point of view. The messaging, positioning, content, you should look at it like 85% of it can be global, but you need to give each region the opportunity to put a wrapper of local data, local information, so it becomes very local. Because somebody in Singapore versus Germany, they want local information. They don't want a generic global piece of information.
So almost setting up a consistent framework, but you're allowing for that customization by the local markets within the framework.
1,000%.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
What pitfalls do you see for people running a global organization? Where do you see this fall apart? I mean, it's probably not giving them that customization, but what challenges have you seen global leaders in the past face?
Yeah, so particularly with US-based companies, the further you get away, the further kind of control you have over it. So what I've seen in the past is APJ, if you don't have disciplined marketing people in those regions, they can start moving to the requests of sales and tweaking the messaging, maybe tweaking the imagery, tweaking the positioning of the company, all because they view it as, hey, this is what our local audience needs and wants, and they'll respond to. But you can't have a branding or a messaging deviation from country to country and region to region. That's one of the biggest issues you have. Or just at a local level, they're doing things with their dollars that aren't necessarily building pipeline, but maybe sales enablement, right? That could be done elsewhere, but you're not aware of it because you're in Cincinnati and these people over in Singapore, right, are 12 hours difference, et cetera. So it's watching for those pitfalls of people deviating. Not for they're trying to do the right thing, but the further you get away, the tougher it is to monitor.
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually seen that here in the U.S., but kind of on the flip side, where marketing is not so close to sales, and so it almost feels like you're not understanding your local market because you don't really understand what the sales team needs. Right, going back to our conversation earlier about understanding and relating to sales. So sales starts customizing everything.
That's right. Yeah, I always, my humble opinion, a field marketing manager has one of the most difficult roles in marketing. They are the face to the sales teams. So take Germany. If somebody's in Germany, they're the face to the German sales team. They need to know what's going on in messaging, positioning, and they need to act in a way that they can push back, right, on sales to say, no, this is not the right way to go. It's a very difficult job. But when you get the things in place of a good structure, good framework, it makes it easier for everyone. But yeah, you got to watch out for that.
So what's your advice if you're a new leader coming into or maybe an existing leader, but you're coming into a new global leadership role? That's now your job tomorrow. Like, what advice do you have for that person?
Get on an airplane and travel out to those regions and listen. Go on a listening tour. If you're out in these other regions, to have people come out from, quote, corporate or the U.S., they really respect that and they love it because they feel like they're being heard. You know, picture yourself as a salesperson in Australia or a salesperson in, India. You don't see marketing people. You don't have a chance to meet with them. So you may be thinking, nobody's really listening to me.
Yeah.
And so go out. I remember I mentioned that I had to go over to EMEA for about 6 months off and on. And I remember I made a commitment to the sales and marketing team that I'll visit every country where we have sales and marketing folks by the end of the year, and this was maybe June. And so I was going over there every month, but some of the time was spent rebuilding the organization and doing a lot of work. And I remember it was late October, and there was still 4 countries I had not gone to. And I didn't want to go after Thanksgiving to Christmas.
Yeah.
So I scheduled to go to Warsaw, Poland, Milan, Amsterdam, and Munich in 1 week because I needed to get so I flew out Sunday night, spent a day and a half with the sales and marketing teams, meetings, dinner, next day, flight, Milan, Amsterdam. What did I learn? It's exhausting.
Yeah.
They greatly appreciated it. When you're in a confined, like you do these interviews, right? You only have a small amount of time, so you're asking specific questions and pulling out information. You do the same thing when you only have a day.
Yeah.
And gathered great information that then the sales teams loved that because I knocked some doors down for them and things like that. So getting back to your question, do a listening tour, take a lot of good notes, and find a handful of things that you can go back to sales and marketing and say, hey, you asked for this and I delivered on it.
Quick, easy wins too, yeah.
But build those relationships, it's critical.
Yeah.
And learn the cultures. Plus, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's a great on-the-road story. So.
That's right.
So I got one more question on the global front, but I gotta do a little lightning round, and I usually do this earlier on, but it's a way to get to know you a little bit better. So I have 4 random quick questions
for
you.
ahead.
So, all right, what's your favorite order at Dunkin' Donuts, or your go-to order at Dunkin' Donuts?
It is a ham and cheese croissant stuffer.
Is that what it's called, a stuffer?
It's called a stuffer.
Right.
It is terrific, and a iced black coffee.
Iced black coffee. All right, so I know you spent a lot of time in California traveling out there. What's your favorite thing about California?
The ocean, the incredible coastline, particularly in Northern California, Carmel, and it's absolutely beautiful.
It is.
It's beautiful.
I got married in Monterey Bay. That's where I got married. So right next to Carmel.
So Half Moon Bay, where the Ritz-Carlton is?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Is that nice?
When I was at one startup, I had never been, and I said, we're going to hold a golf tournament there. Big risk because of the cost. Everybody loved it. What a beautiful.
That whole area is just
gorgeous. God, incredible. Yes,
so this leads to my next question. What's your least favorite thing about California?
Least favorite thing about California. I don't think the food's as good as New England.
Oh yeah, interesting.
You know, I think I'm a seafood person.
Yeah.
And so what they call seafood out there, I know it's seafood, but it's not a Atlantic lobster.
I think I would give you that. I'd fight back, I think, on the like the ethnic food, and we'll exclude New York because I think. But like I love the ethnic food in the Bay Area. But I could see that in the seafood. Like last night, we had oysters and some fish last night.
How was it?
Oh, it was unbelievable. I was with a guy that's from the area too, and he was like pointing all the ones we should order, and it was great.
Yeah, nice.
So I'll give you that. All right, where are you most excited to travel to next?
My favorite country on the planet is Italy.
Yeah.
My favorite city is Florence. I've been there multiple times. But my family and I have talked about going to Scotland.
Cool.
Yeah, so we've got some ancestors from the Scottish area, Scotland, and it just looks breathtaking.
Yeah.
So, and I've heard great things about Scotland,
Yeah,
so I'd love to go to Scotland.
Never been.
No, I haven't either. I haven't either.
All right, so I want to get back to mentorship as we kind of look to wrap this up, because we talked a little bit about your network that helped you at NetApp, and I know you mentioned mentorship earlier. Like, what has that been to you personally, and what's your philosophy around mentorship?
Yeah, my philosophy is for every leader, people ask the leadership, okay, so what are your top 3 priorities? And it's typically, hit the numbers and et cetera, et cetera. I think mentoring and training your high performers should be a top 3 for every leader, regardless of discipline. Why? Because people leave jobs because of their managers.
Yeah.
If you're investing in your high performers, they're not going to go anywhere. They see a career path. They see somebody who's interested in them. From a company standpoint, you're building a bench. So there's so much positive to it. On a personal level, I've had terrific mentors, and I know, that one, Dave Hitz actually did more than just that one meeting, but think about how he changed my trajectory, because he was willing to invest in me and mentor me. So, nothing is more rewarding to me than seeing people that I've mentored or that were on my team grow in their careers, become VPs, SVPs, and CMOs. Or, someone recently said to me, Brian, you have invested, and I knew I was investing in this person, but they said, you always make time for us. You're always interested in helping our career. That to me means more than, hey, you hit your pipeline numbers. Although from a company standpoint, you got to hit that. It's just so rewarding to mentor someone and to see them grow, and it's great for the business. So my philosophy is, if you're not doing all of those things, I think you're missing out.
How do you balance being a good mentor versus managing performance, especially if someone is not meeting those performance expectations?
Yeah. Somebody told me early on, never miss an opportunity to provide feedback. And so I often look for opportunities to provide people even small feedback. So if I'm in a meeting and someone's giving a presentation and they did a good job, or maybe it could have been better, I always try and catch up with them afterwards and say, hey, here's the positives, but maybe you need to work on. So I think part of the issue leaders run into is managing performance. They don't say enough to the people who are struggling, or they're not. It's difficult. You don't want to. It's tough to have those conversations. But if you look for little opportunities to provide feedback, then it doesn't feel like you have to just overwhelm the person with the last 4 months you haven't been doing your role.
Yeah.
So I think that's where mentoring and it can be very, very helpful, and it can help ease into helping people get out of the slump they're in.
Now, how do you institutionalize this as a leader? Do you just demonstrate by example, or do you set up some sort of mentoring structure? Like, what's your recommendation for the marketing leaders out there?
Yeah, I think having a mentoring program is a good thing, with some structure and framework so people can participate in that. But it really is setting an example. And I think it's difficult to say to people, hey, I expect you to be a mentor like that. That's difficult because they may not be comfortable with it, they
Yeah.
may not be good at it, etc. So I always look for setting it by example. And one of the things I'm proud of is I wasn't part of a formal program. I just loved doing it, so I had a bunch of people. And at one of the companies, they had a women's group designed to help women advance their careers in IT. And they reached out to me and said, Brian, there were only 2 other men, and we'd like you to mentor women on the team. And I said, I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
So that to me was, I was proud of that they saw that my mentoring was having an impact and they wanted me to help them out.
Now, do you still have mentors of your own, or are you just mentoring people?
I have to call. I'm going to call one of them on the way home today. So yes, I still have 1 or 2 mentors.
And how important is that? I mean, are you ever at a point where you don't? I assume the answer is no, but you don't need mentors anymore.
No,
you probably always need that incoming.
You do, and even if it's somebody like the person I'm going to talk to, he and I don't talk all the time.
Yeah.
But when I have questions, or plus he's a friend of mine, we're just talking, shooting the breeze, I know I can trust him with great advice. And I think anybody needs that. You need somebody that you can bounce ideas off of. And so I think having maybe not formal mentors for the rest of your career, but at least people you can pick the phone up and say, hey, this is the situation, what do you think, is critical.
Yeah, and it's funny, I was talking to another business leader the other day, and we were talking about partnerships, and his approach was, it was very commercially driven, but he said, we always want to be the partner that aims of giving at least 51% or more value to our partners. Mm-hmm. And that's how we also seek partners. Are they providing value to us? And it was a very commercially driven conversation, but I think it also applies to the relationships in our lives. And are we giving and giving and giving? And something I've seen, especially on this show and talking to people like yourself, is people like you that are giving a lot in terms of that mentorship, as an example, are also receiving a lot without even asking for it. And I go back to that NetApp example again, right? You didn't ask for people to recommend you as the acting CMO, but people took that initiative and wanted to give to you. And so it's just one of those weird things in life. The more you give, the more you receive, I feel like.
And it's true in every aspect of life.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun, Brian. I have one last question for you, and you've given tremendous advice throughout. But what's your one lasting piece of advice for people on the road?
Enjoy the time that you're out there. Make sure that you have a really good life balance. People say it, but it's critical. And just go to work every day feeling lucky that you're doing something you enjoy and you're working with people you really enjoy. And if that's not the case, then you should probably find another role. But if that is the case, you should wake up every morning and say, how lucky am I?
I love it. Well, cheers. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the Starbucks coffee.
Here's to enjoying the little things.
That's right.
Cheers.
Cheers.